Okay, Unit 5, Becoming a World Power. We're going to look at how the United States, kind of makes its presence felt on the world stage. We go from being, one of the 13 colonies of Great Britain to an independent nation. Now we're looking at becoming a world power. The first of the three areas we're going to look at is Alaska, Hawaii, and how we expand in the Pacific. So I gave you, just a couple E words here, just to kind of set the stage, and then I had me and my little battleship, all right, cruising across the Pacific. So we'll start with Alaska, work our way across the Pacific, all right, and we'll see how the United States, at least in the Western Hemisphere, starts to assert some of its power. All right, I want to start by just kind of glancing at how the world colonization is working at this time. So the map shows you around 1900, right? You can see there are several Asian countries and several European countries that are starting to, establish colonies throughout the world. If you take a second and you look at Africa, you can see Africa is going to be heavily colonized versus over here in North and South America, very little colonies going on. Right, so this is kind of the opportunity for the United States to, pick up some ground, right, on the rest of the powerful countries around the world. Right. So what are some of the factors that drive the United States to become an imperial power? Well, the first one is the idea of manifest destiny, which is something you did in 7th grade. Right. It's the belief that it was our destiny to expand from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. Well, that ends up happening. We kind of, there's nowhere left to expand, so we have to look overseas for more natural resources. Right? It's not so much an overcrowding thing; it's a greed or a desire to get more resources. So you can see our investment, how much money we spend, right? And would be overseas. Is going to increase drastically. Right? So here would be some of the reasons. This is work-pack question number 1. Right? The idea of imperialism. All right, the policy by which, obviously you can read it, but the key word here is extending stronger country, extending control over a weaker country. Now, an easy way to remember this is the word empire, very similar to imperial. So you got Darth Vader, the Empire, right? Imperial stormtroopers. Yeah, that's the Star Wars nerd in me. So just kind of always try and remember that. Imperial sounds an awful like empire, which, I guess imperial would be almost an adjective describing somebody that is an empire. But here would be some reasons. First one, obviously, you want to become a powerful country, you want to build an empire, that would lead to imperialism. Right? This is a key word here, ethnocentrism. If we do Mrs. Elston proud, right, and we use our English skills, ethno means culture, centrism means central. The idea that your culture is at the center, or your culture is better than somebody else's. Right? And this is also sometimes going to be referred to as white man's burden, right, which means that the white culture, throughout history was considered to be civilized and cultured, right? And it was their duty to, think about when we did the last 2 units ago with expansion in the West, civilizing the Native Americans. That was an example of white man's burden, that, their way of life wasn't acceptable, they needed to change. Right? Financial superiority, that would be establishing stronger trade, making more money. All right, strengthen your military, and finally spreading democracy, which that comes into play, especially after World War II. Right, so here would just be a quick little cause and effect kind of thing. Definitely take some time, make some notes, go through that, especially the desire for naval stations. So it breaks it up into 3 categories. Right, some good information there. All right, so here's how the United States kind of gets their start. Right, we start trading with Japan throughout the mid-1800s. Right, and it's a new trade partner. All right, lots of wealth, great opportunity. Right, unfortunately for us, they're located across the Pacific Ocean. So the United States has to go about trying to, right, here would be Japan. Right, here's obviously the United States. Right, that's a really long way to travel. We're going to need refueling stations. Right, we're going to need places, to station military, station ships in case something happens. So the United States is going to start looking for opportunities. So there's Alaska and Hawaii. Okay, here's the Philippines. Here's Guam. Right, the U.S. is looking for opportunities for colonies right across the Pacific to help out with trade. Right, so the first one we look at is Alaska. Right, and William Seward was Secretary of State under Lincoln. Right, purchases Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. Right, now here's the funny thing, is that the size of Alaska is huge. A lot of people don't realize because it's always tucked away in a small corner of the map. But if you look at a map of North America, you can see Alaska is a large, large piece of land, right? We just happen to know that as you travel further and further north, what happens to the temperature? It gets colder. So when he made this purchase, right, everybody thought it was a huge mistake, and they referred to it as Seward's folly or Seward's mistake because he bought this big chunk of land that nobody had any use for. Right? But the joke was on them because it turned out to have a lot of valuable natural resources, gold at first, and then it turns out, lots and lots of oil there as well. So, that's the first step that the U.S. takes, right? Buying Alaska from Russia. All right, the second one, here's just your quick little story with Hawaii, right? We started establishing, a presence on the islands of Hawaii, right, through economic purposes in terms of, setting up farms, growing tropical fruit, things like that. So throughout the 1800s, the American farmers there start to get more and more power and assert themselves, right? And the ruler of Hawaii, Queen Liliuokalani, right? She does not, obviously, the power wants to stay, the Hawaiian government wants to retain their power. The U.S. ends up overthrowing it, right? And then, as you can tell, are the Hawaiians going to be happy with that? No. So we end up kind of annexing is kind of like absorbing, right? We absorb Texas, we annex Texas, right? When you're in 7th grade, now we're annexing Hawaii. All right, so now if you look at a map, right, remember, we're establishing trade in Japan, right? What's the importance of Hawaii? Obviously, all the trade routes go through Hawaii, refueling, right? We eventually put a naval station at Pearl Harbor. We come back to that in World War II. Right, so it definitely just helps, the U.S. presence in the Pacific, right? And then the last part we're going to look at is China, right? Once we started trade with China, or excuse me, trade with Japan, we realized that China was an even better opportunity for trade, right? But unfortunately for the United States, all right, the European countries and Japan kind of beat the United States to the punch. So they already set up trade, right? And the U.S. is going to want to get involved with that. There's lots of money there. Right, definitely something the U.S. is interested in. Unfortunately, right, all those old countries set up what referred to as spheres of influence. Right, and I got a map on the next slide which kind of shows you, right, that each country has a specific location that they're allowed to trade in, and that country alone is allowed to trade there. So if we look at the yellow, right, you can see France, Britain, Germany, Japan, Russia. So if we look at the yellow, that's France. So this whole area here, that's France's sphere of influence, meaning no other country can trade there, just France. So it's kind of exclusive special trading privileges that no other country gets in that area, right? And what country do you realize is missing from here? There's no United States. So we didn't have a sphere of influence. Obviously, that's something that we would like to change, right? So how do we go about, getting ourselves some trading rights here? Right. Well, the United States passes creates what's referred to as the open door policy. It's actually a really good nickname because it sounds, it kind of is exactly what it says. Right. The idea here is that no country should have a monopoly. That's a word from the last unit, meaning one person controlling, that industry. Right. So, sphere of influence gave each country exclusive control in that area. So the open door policy would essentially open the door to China and let anybody trade, and which is what the United States wanted. Okay, so the idea of this whole topic is the U.S. wants to trade with China and Japan, and in order to kind of do that, we need to establish a stronger presence in the Pacific. So that's where Alaska comes in, Hawaii, and several of the other islands. Okay. All right, so if you have any questions, make sure you write them down, add your notes, come to class ready to ask some questions.